You're at your only daughter's wedding. The music is playing. The guests are smiling, and for a moment you think maybe, just maybe, you belong. Then, the groom, the man your daughter swears she loves, shoves your face into the wedding cake. Guests laugh. He smirks and says, "Try the dessert." I could taste sugar and humiliation dripping down my chin. But as I wiped the icing away, I remembered something no one else in that room knew, something that would turn the entire night upside down. You see, I'm a billionaire, and the groom had just made the worst mistake of his life. Before I tell you how I turned that humiliation into the sweetest revenge of my life, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with where you're listening from, because trust me, this story, you're going to want to hear it to the very end. I remember the restaurant before I remember the people. The crystal chandeliers overhead sparkled like galaxies, spilling soft gold light across tables, dressed in linen so white it almost glowed. The air smelled faintly of truffle oil and expensive wine, and every waiter seemed trained to glide like a shadow. Not a sound of shoes against marble, just whispers of movement, like ghosts in black vests. I knew immediately this wasn't my kind of place. But I wasn't here for me. I was here for my daughter, Megan, who sat to my left, her hands folded in her lap like a child trying her best to behave at church. She'd dressed beautifully, though I could see the nervous crease between her brows. Across from us sat Urban. The man she swore, was different from his high society family. Next to him were his parents, Eldon and Priscilla Whitaker. From the moment they shook my hand, I knew what they saw when they looked at me. Not a father. Not a man who had raised his daughter single-handedly after her mother passed away. Not someone who had sacrificed every weekend, every spare dollar, every scrap of energy to give his child a life worth living. No, to them, I was just lesser. Eldon leaned back in his chair, his cufflinks catching the chandelier's glow. When he spoke, his voice cut sharper than the steak knives arranged neatly on the table. "Of course, we understand your financial limitations," he said smoothly. After I'd been rambling about an outdoor wedding pavilion I thought would be lovely, the words dropped onto the table like stones in water, sending ripples through the conversation. Priscilla's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Urban smirked behind his wine glass. Megan's cheeks flamed crimson. And me. I sat there, forcing a polite smile, as if my entire life had just been reduced to a pity case. The Whitakers didn't care that I'd been describing a simple, elegant park setting. To them, it was laughy-worthy. "Dad makes things work with what we have," Megan said quickly, her voice pitched high. "He's always been resourceful." Resourceful. Eldon repeated the word like it was a joke. He rolled it on his tongue, tasting it like fine wine he already knew he wouldn't buy. That's one way to put it. The waiter appeared at just the right moment, refilling our water glasses without a sound. But his timing only made the silence heavier. I glanced down at the menu, the kind with no prices. A warning. I'd already chosen the salmon cheapest by instinctual. The rest of them ordered aged steaks that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. The thought made my stomach tighten. And then came Priscilla, with her diamond-edged smile. "Don't worry about the wedding expenses," she cooed. "We completely understand your situation." My situation. As if poverty were some terminal illness. As if my entire life had been nothing more than a slow-motion tragedy to be pitied. Urban leaned back, his expensive suit straining across his chest. "We've got connections with the best venues in the Hamptons," he bragged. "The Grand Pavilion, $50,000, just for the space. You probably haven't heard of it." I hadn't, and I admitted it. He smiled like that ignorance was proof of my inadequacy. "But don't worry about contributing, Theodore," he added, almost generously. "We've got this covered." Inside my jacket pocket sat the small gift box I had brought. A vintage silver locket I'd found at an estate sale Victorian, with space for 2 photographs. It had cost me $37, but I'd chosen it because it meant something, because it carried history and love. Now, under their gaze, it felt as cheap and hollow as a toy ring in a gumball machine. Megan reached under the table, squeezed my arm gently. "Dad, you don't have to. I always provide for my family," I said quietly, because that was true. That had always been true. Eldon chuckled, dry and dismissive. "Of course you do. In your own way." The dessert course arrived soon after, towering chocolate sculptures decorated with actual gold leaf. The kind of thing no one eats, just admires, like art. It felt absurd to even lift a fork. I couldn't stop thinking about the scarred wooden kitchen table at home. The one where Megan had done her homework for 12 years, where we'd celebrated her college acceptance with a grocery store cake. That cake had been sweeter than any gold leaf confection. Urban was still talking, bragging about a yacht for his bachelor party, inviting me as if I were capable of stepping onto a world I clearly didn't belong to. Then Priscilla turned to me, her smile as sharp as her diamond earrings. "Theodore, what is it you do again?" "Investment consulting," I said. "True, if incomplete." "How lovely," she said, her tone dipped in honey. "Small accounts, I imagine." The check arrived in a sleek leather folder. Eldon didn't even glance at it before sliding in his black card. The waiter's grateful nod told me the tip alone was more than my monthly grocery budget. When we stepped outside, the Whitaker's Mercedes gleamed under the street lamps, sleek and predatory. My old Toyota Camry looked like a lost dog in the wrong neighborhood. Eldon leaned out the window as his car purred to life. "See you soon," he called. "We'll handle the real planning." I opened the passenger door for Megan in silence. She didn't speak either, not as we pulled onto the highway, not as the lights washed over us in waves of gold and shadow. Her silence weighed heavier than anything Eldon had said. Finally, she spoke. "The restaurant was beautiful," she whispered. "Those chandeliers must have cost a fortune." I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. "Megan," I said, my voice low and rough, "we need to talk about Urban." The highway stretched ahead of us, a black ribbon stitched with white dashes, illuminated only by the occasional flood of headlights from passing cars. My Camry hummed steadily beneath us, but the silence between Megan and me felt louder than any engine roar. Her hands fidgeted with the strap of her purse, the leather squeaking softly. Every so often she glanced out the window, her profile catching the glow of streetlights, jaw tight, lips pressed together. I cleared my throat. "Megan," I said, "we need to talk about Urban." Her posture stiffened immediately. She didn't look at me. "What about him?" "The way he spoke tonight," I said, choosing my words carefully, "the way his family treated you, treated me." She finally turned, eyes flashing. "They're just used to having money, Dad. They don't mean anything by it." I let out a bitter laugh, short and sharp. "You think what Eldon said was harmless? You think Urban sitting there smirking while his father belittled me was nothing?" Her voice rose, higher, defensive. "You're reading too much into it. You always do. You've never liked Urban. You're looking for reasons to hate him." That stung more than I expected. My daughter, the one person I had always thought would understand me, was defending him. Defending them. A semi-truck roared past, its headlights flooding the interior. In that momentary glare, I saw her face clearly. Not angry, not defiant, but desperate. Desperate for me to accept a life she hadn't fully chosen, but was clinging to anyway. "Megan," I said, my voice lower now, almost pleading. "Character doesn't change with bank account size. Tonight showed me who they really are. Who Urban really is. You barely know them. I know enough." She snapped. "And I know you're being paranoid, controlling." Even the word sliced through me sharper than Eldon's condescension had. Controlling, as if my desire to protect her, to spare her from decades of unhappiness, was nothing but a cage. "I'm not trying to control you," I said carefully, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I'm trying to protect you from making a mistake that could cost you your future." Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "So now my engagement is a mistake? That's what you think?" Silence. I couldn't say the word yes, though every bone in my body screamed it. "Stop the car," she said suddenly. "What?" I said. "Stop the car. Right now." I glanced at her, illuminated by the dashboard glow. Her face was flushed, eyes bright with fury or maybe heartbreak. "Megan, let's just pull over." "Dad." I flicked on the blinker and eased onto the shoulder. Before the car fully stopped, she was unbuckling her seatbelt. She grabbed her purse and opened the door, the rush of cool night air filling the car. "You don't understand anything," she spat. "You don't understand Urban, or his family, or what I need." I reached out instinctively. "Sweetheart, please, what I need," she cut me off, voice trembling, "is support. From my father. Not judgment, not lectures, just support." Her heels clicked on the asphalt as she stepped away, silhouetted against the harsh fluorescent glow of a nearby gas station. She stopped once, leaning down to meet my eyes through the open door. "At least Urban doesn't treat me like I am too stupid to make my own choices." The door slammed shut, rattling through my bones. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at her as she walked toward the convenience store. My phone buzzed. I didn't even need to check to know it was Urban. She was already texting him, already choosing him over me. I stayed parked until she disappeared inside the store, safe beneath its buzzing lights. Then I pulled back onto the highway, alone. The passenger seat beside me was empty, but it didn't feel empty. It felt haunted. Every time I glanced sideways, I half expected to see her sitting there, 15 years old again, begging me to take her for ice cream after a soccer game. Instead, all I saw was absence. When I finally pulled into my driveway in Hoboken, my modest two-story house seemed smaller than usual. The porch light cast its familiar glow across the yard, where Megan and I had planted tomatoes every spring since she was 8. I turned off the engine but didn't get out. I just sat there, the ticking of the cooling car filling the silence. My chest ached in a way I couldn't name. A week ago, everything had felt different. A week ago, she was still my little girl. Now she was walking into a family that measured love in dollars. A family that saw me as an inconvenience. But as I brushed the final smear of frosting from my shirt collar, the stain from earlier when Urban had shoved my face into the cake during rehearsal, I felt something shift inside me. Anger, resolve. Something darker. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was poor. They thought I was nothing, but they didn't know the truth. And soon, they would learn. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark living room, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. Shadows stretched across the familiar walls that had witnessed Megan grow from a little girl chasing fireflies to a young woman preparing to walk into a life that wasn't hers. The clock ticked steadily, but my mind wouldn't quiet. Every replay of the evening, the smirk on Urban's face, Eldon's mocking tone, Priscilla's honeyed condescension tightened something inside my chest. They thought they knew who I was. They thought I was just some middle-class widower trying to cling to relevance at his daughter's big wedding. But here's what they didn't know. I wasn't struggling to make ends meet. I wasn't resourceful because I had no other choice. I was wealthy, richer than all of them combined. Not by inheritance, not by luck, by grit, by years of discipline, sacrifice, and decisions no one ever saw. I built my fortune slowly, quietly, through investments most people overlooked. While others chased flashy IPOs, I bought land acres of farmland outside cities, long before development crept in. I studied markets late into the night, ran numbers until my eyes blurred. Every bonus check, every windfall, I reinvested instead of spending, and I never flaunted it. Not once, because after my wife died, Megan was all I had, and I didn't want her to grow up believing money was love. I wanted her to know the value of effort, of kindness, of relationships built on something real. So I drove a modest Toyota. I lived in the same humble Hoboken house. I wore off-the-rack suits and ate grocery store cake. People assumed I was scraping by. I let them. It kept the fakes away. It kept Megan grounded. But as I sat there in the dim light, I wondered if my silence had backfired. If by hiding what I had, I'd allowed my daughter to believe she had to marry into wealth to feel secure, to accept humiliation as part of the bargain. I leaned back, the old recliner creaking beneath me, and thought of the Whitakers. They were everything I had tried to shield Megan from. Arrogance dressed as sophistication, cruelty disguised as humor. Value measured not by character, but by credit limit, and Urban, he had stood there with frosting on his hands and a grin on his face after shoving my head into the cake, mocking me in front of everyone. I remembered the sting of sugar in my eyes, the cold icing dripping down my chin, guests laughing awkwardly, trying not to meet my gaze. Urban's voice, smug and loud. Try the dessert. At that moment, I'd thought of my diabetes. How reckless it was, how dangerous. But more than that, I'd thought of Megan, laughing nervously beside him, pretending it was harmless. Pretending humiliation was a joke worth swallowing. The Whitakers had revealed who they were, and Megan hadn't seen it. Not yet. I ran a hand over my face, feeling the rough stubble on my jaw. For years, I'd kept my wealth hidden because I believed love and respect had to stand on their own. But now I saw that maybe the only way to protect my daughter was to reveal the truth. To use what I had not as a weapon against Herb, as a mirror. To show her exactly who the Whitakers were when faced with the one thing they worshipped. Money. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through old financial reports, portfolios, property deeds, numbers most people would never believe, billions in assets. Quietly amassed, silently guarded. I'd lived simply, deliberately. But that didn't mean I was weak. No, I had power. More than Urban, more than Eldon, more than all of them. And for the first time, I felt the weight of that power settle on my shoulders, not as a burden, but as a weapon. They thought I was beneath them. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was a man to be pitied. They were wrong. For Megan's sake, for my dignity's sake, it was time to stop hiding. Time to remind the Whitakers that character matters. Yes, but so does consequence. I thought of her words, the way she'd slammed the door, and said, "At least Urbanos and T treat me like I am too stupid to make my own choices." It broke me, because she didn't see it yet. She didn't see the trap she was walking into. But she would. By the time the sun rose, I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to beg her to leave him. I wasn't going to lecture her anymore. I was going to let the Whitakers expose themselves, with my wealth as the catalyst. And when they did, when Megan saw their true faces, she would understand. The morning of Megan's wedding should have been the happiest day of my life. Instead, as I stood in front of the mirror, tying the same black tie I'd worn to too many funerals, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. Pride and dread, twisting together. My little girl was about to walk down the aisle, but toward a man I didn't trust, toward a family that despised me. Still, when I saw her in her wedding dress, all the doubts melted for just a moment. Megan looked radiant, like the little girl who used to twirl around the living room in her mother's old scarves had finally become the woman she was meant to be. Tears burned my eyes, and I kissed her forehead. "You looked beautiful," I whispered. She smiled, though her eyes searched mine, as if looking for approval I couldn't quite give. The ceremony was a blur of flowers and violin strings. The venue was just as Urban had bragged, the grand pavilion, a palace disguised as a hall, chandeliers glittering like constellations overhead. I sat stiffly in the front row, listening to vows spoken like rehearsed lines in a play. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause. My daughter kissed her new husband, and I forced myself to clap, each strike of my palms feeling like nails hammered into wood. Then came the reception. Tables gleamed with silver cutlery and floral arrangements so extravagant they looked more like sculptures than centerpieces. Waiters flowed like shadows carrying champagne on crystal trays. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and the Whitakers glided through it all like royalty among peasants. I tried to stay small, to blend into the background. This was her day, after all. My job was to smile, nod, and endure, until Urban called out loudly, "Come on, Dad, you've got to try the cake." The towering wedding cake was wheeled into the center of the room, 5 tiers of fondant perfection, sugar roses cascading down the sides. Megan clapped her hands, glowing. Urban grinned, knife in hand, and cut a slice with theatrical flair. He turned to me, motioning, "Here, Theodore, have the first bite." I stepped forward, hesitating. His grin widened, eyes glinting with something sharper than joy. And before I knew what was happening, his hand shot out, shoving the plate against my face, forcing cake and frosting up my nose, into my mouth. Across my cheeks, gasps, laughter, cameras flashing. Urban threw his head back and exclaimed loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Try the dessert." The sound of it burned into my skull. Frosty stung my eyes. I sputtered, choking on sugar, heart hammering as panic surged. My body reminded me of the danger I had: diabetes. Too much sugar wasn't just humiliating, it was lethal. I staggered back, icing dripping down my chin, while laughter rippled through the guests like wildfire. Even Megan's laugh rang out, awkward, fragile, but still, she laughed. That broke me more than the prank itself. I swayed on my feet, trying to wipe my face clean with trembling hands, anger boiling so hot my skin felt fevered. Every instinct screamed to strike back, to shout, to storm out, but the words died in my throat, and insolence, it happened in an instant. A hush fell over the crowd as one of the guests, a man I didn't know well, but who apparently knew me, pointed and shouted, "He's a billionaire." The room froze. Forks clattered onto plates. Laughter cut short, replaced by gasps and whispers. Urban's smug smile faltered. His face drained of color, his eyes darting toward me in disbelief. Eldon and Priscilla exchanged quick, panicked glances, their practiced aristocratic masks slipping for the first time all evening. I stood there, cake still dripping from my jawline. But the humiliation had evaporated, replaced by something heavier. Power. The air shifted. I wasn't the poor widower anymore. I wasn't the man to pity. I was the man they had mocked without realizing he was standing on a mountain far higher than theirs. For the first time all night, the Whitakers didn't look like royalty. They looked like prey. I slowly dabbed at my face with a napkin, the sugar grit scraping against my skin. My heart had steadied, my breathing slowed. And when I looked up, I saw Urban's mouth opening, desperate to speak, desperate to explain. But it was too late. The truth was out, and the game had just changed. The ballroom had never felt so quiet. Not even during the ceremony had the silence been this absolute. Dozens of guests sat frozen with forks in midair, champagne glasses trembling in their hands. Every eye in the room was on me, standing there, cake sliding from my face, onto the floor like a grotesque waterfall. I could feel my pulse in my temples, the frosting sticky on my skin, but none of it mattered anymore. The guest's words still hung in the air like a thunderclap. "He's a billionaire." For years, the Whitakers had lorded their supposed superiority over me. I had let them sneer, let them speak down to me, all to avoid making things harder for my daughter. But now the balance had shifted, and everyone could see it. Urban laughed nervously, brushing crumbs off his hands, as though it had all been harmless fun. "Billionaire," he scoffed, his voice a half octave higher than usual. "Surely, you're exaggerating, Theodore's. Well, he's comfortable. Maybe, but let's not start rumors." A murmur rippled through the guests. Comfortable. That was the word they used for people who owned a nice house in the suburbs. Maybe a second car. Not men who owned shares in multiple companies, land, and trust funds carefully guarded over decades. One of the older gentlemen at a nearby table leaned forward and said, "It's no rumor. I've seen his name in the shareholders' reports for Harrington & Co. My firm audited them last year." Gasps again. Heads turned, and just like that, Urban's forced smile cracked. Priscilla, pale as porcelain, clutched her pearls so tightly I thought the string might snap. Eldon's jaw twitched, his carefully cultivated smile stiffening into something closer to a grimace. I took my time, wiping the last of the cake from my face, then placed the napkin on the table with deliberate care. My voice, when I finally spoke, was low but carried through the hush. "I suppose wealth isn't something I like to brag about, but I imagine it's better to be underestimated than overestimated." The words landed like stones, tossed into still water, sending ripples of discomfort across the Whitakers' perfect visage. Urban stammered, his hands twitching as though searching for an apology he didn't know how to form. "It was just a joke, Theodore. Just a bit of fun between family. No harm meant fun." I repeated, arching a brow. "You force sugar down the throat of a man with diabetes. If humiliation was your idea of a wedding toast, then congratulations, you've set the bar very low for what marriage with you will be like. A few guests coughed awkwardly, others exchanged uneasy glances. Urban flushed crimson, his confidence shrinking by the second. Megan rushed forward, grabbing my hand. Dad, stop, please, you're making a scene. Her voice cracked with embarrassment, not defense. It cut deeper than any of Urban's insults. I looked at her, my daughter, radiant in her gown yet blind to the truth, sitting right in front of her. I didn't make the scene, I said softly. He did. She flinched, but said nothing. Eldon finally stepped in, his tone oiled with forced courtesy. Theodore, surely this misunderstanding can be resolved quietly. We're all family now. Let's not spoil the evening. I turned to him, meeting his gaze head-on for the first time since this charade began. Family, Mr. Whitaker, isn't built on humiliation. It isn't built on cruelty disguised as jokes. It's built on respect. Something your son and, perhaps your household, knows very little about. His mouth tightened, but he didn't respond. That was the moment I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't on the defensive. I wasn't swallowing my pride for Megan's sake. I wasn't bowing my head to keep the peace. The Whitakers were scrambling, and I was standing tall. Urban tried once more, his words tumbling over each other. I didn't know about your finances. If I'd known. I cut him off. If you'd known I had money, you would have treated me with respect. That's what you're saying. He froze, mouth opening, closing, like a fish gasping for air. The truth was plain for everyone to see. Urban's apology wasn't about remorse. It was about damage control. The groom had humiliated me because he thought I was powerless. He dehumiliated me because he believed I was powerless. And now that the illusion was shattered, he was scrambling to fix it. I glanced around the room, noting the shifting eyes, the whispers. Guests who had laughed at me minutes earlier were suddenly eager to dissociate themselves from Urban, their smiles brittle, their laughter gone. For years, the Whitakers had held the social high ground. Tonight, it crumbled beneath their feet. I leaned closer to Urban, just enough that only he and Megan could hear. You've made a grave mistake, one that won't be forgotten, and trust me, your actions tonight will cost you far more than my forgiveness. Megan squeezed my hand tighter, panic flashing across her face. She whispered urgently, Dad, please don't ruin this for me. I met her desperate eyes, and whispered back, I'm not ruining anything. He is. The music started again, awkwardly, as if the band thought they could drown the tension with violins. But it didn't work. The evening limped on, a fractured celebration where every smile was forced, every laugh hollow. And as I sat there, ignored yet no longer ridiculed, I began to plot. They thought the cake was the end of my humiliation. They didn't know it was just the beginning of their downfall. Because now, the game had truly begun. I didn't storm out of the wedding that night. That would have been too easy for them. Too neat. Instead, I stayed. I smiled politely when guests approached, shook hands when necessary, and even raised a glass and toast when the champagne was passed. Outwardly, I looked like a man who had let bygones be bygones. But inside, my mind was already moving. Every cruel smirk, every belittling comment, every shred of dignity they had stripped from me over the years, they had all been kindling. And now, Urban had struck the match. By the time the newlyweds drove away in their limousine, cans rattling behind them, I already knew exactly how I would dismantle the Whitaker world piece by piece. The morning after, while most of the guests were nursing hangovers, I was at my desk with a phone in my hand. One call to my financial advisor, another to a lawyer, a third to a private investigator whose services I'd kept on retainer for years, not for malice, but for prudence. Urban Whitaker, I said, I want everything. Employment records, financial debts, side businesses, associates. If he sneezed in public, I want the tissues. The man chuckled. You'll have a report by Friday. By Wednesday, I had more than enough. Urban's confidence was built on sand. He was in the golden boy his family painted him to be. He was drowning in credit card debt, leveraged up to his ears in risky investments, and propped up only by his father's name. Worse yet, he'd been quietly siphoning money from the very construction firm he managed for Eldon. Whitaker, fraud, embezzlement, mismanagement. If half the things in that file ever reached the light of day, Urban's career and reputation would collapse like a house of cards. I didn't act immediately. Revenge, real revenge, isn't about rage, it's about patience, about precision. I arranged a casual lunch with Megan a week later. She looked radiant but tired, the honeymoon glow already dulled. How's married life treating you? I asked, stirring my coffee. She hesitated. It's good. Urban's busy though. A lot of late nights at the office. Late nights, right. The report had already told me what office hours often meant for him. Bars, women, gambling tables. I studied her face, my daughter's face, trying to gauge if she saw the truth yet. Did she know? Or was she still under his spell? Megan, I said gently, if you ever feel uncertain, or if something doesn't feel right, I want you to remember, you, Dan T., have to accept disrespect just because you love someone. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, as if the words struck a hidden chord, but then she smiled and changed the subject. That was enough for me. The seed of doubt was planted. My next move was subtle, a dinner party, my own. I invited a select group of businessmen, investors, and community leaders, people who mattered, and of course, I invited the Whitakers. They arrived with their usual airs of superiority. But this time, things were different. Because I was the host. Because my home, my grounds, my art, my staff, every detail whispered the truth they tried to bury. That I was not beneath them, but above. When Irvin walked in, I caught the flicker of discomfort in his eyes as he realized the truth. He wasn't in control here. Over dinner, I steered the conversation so casually toward business ventures, local developments, and opportunities. Each time, I dropped hints of my holdings, my influence, my network, not boastfully, but as though it were common knowledge. By the end of the night, it was clear. The Whitakers weren't the untouchable family in the room anymore. I was. And the best part, I never once mentioned the cake. I didn't have to. The contrast was humiliation enough. 2 weeks later, my lawyer called with updates. We'd quietly acquired shares in companies tied to the Whitaker firm. Slowly, discreetly, we were positioning ourselves. At the same time, whispers began to circulate about Urban's management style. A supplier suddenly backed out of a deal. A bank delayed a loan approval. Small inconveniences, but enough to make him sweat. And sweat he did. I saw him at a charity gala not long after. His collar was damp, his smile too wide, his laugh too forced. Megan clung to his arm, but even she looked uneasy, her gaze darting between us as though she could sense the undercurrent. Urban approached me with a glass of scotch, forcing cheer. "Theodore, old man, haven't seen you in a while. We should talk business sometime." I smiled thinly. "Business? I thought you said I didn't belong in that world." His face fell for just a heartbeat before he chuckled and muttered, "Ah, you know how weddings are. Too much champagne, too many nerves." I leaned in, my voice low. "You humiliated me once, Irvin. Do not give me a reason to return the favor in public." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. He knew the balance had shifted. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Late one evening, Megan called me in tears. "Dad," she whispered, "I think Urban's lying to me. He says he's at the office, but I saw a charge on his card, a hotel." I closed my eyes, rage simmering beneath my ribs, but forced calm into my voice. "Megan, I need you to listen to me. Whatever happens, remember your worth. You deserve honesty, you deserve respect." For the first time, she didn't defend him. She didn't excuse his behavior. She just cried softly and said, "I don't know what to do." And I knew then that my revenge wasn't just for me. It was for her too. For the years she had been manipulated into thinking less of me. For the years she'd been blinded by the Whitakers' veneer of perfection. Urban had destroyed his own marriage. I just had to let the truth shine through. By the end of that month, I had everything I needed. The evidence, the leverage, the influence. Urban was unraveling. Megan was beginning to see the truth. The Whitakers' empire was trembling on its foundations. And as I stood at my study window one evening, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I allowed myself a thin smile. They thought they had broken me with cake and laughter, but they had only given me the perfect excuse to break them in return. And soon, very soon, the world would see the Whitakers for what they truly were. The storm broke on a Thursday morning. By then, I had been patient. Patient enough to let Urban hang himself with his own rope. All it took was a well-timed nudge. That nudge came in the form of a thick envelope containing copies of bank statements, falsified invoices, and photographs of Urban entering hotels he claimed were late-night office meetings. I didn't send them directly. That would have been too obvious. Too vengeful. Instead, I sent them through anonymous channels, one packet to a local journalist with a keen nose for scandal, another to a board member at the Whitaker firm, and a third to Megan, my daughter. By noon, whispers were spreading across town. By evening, they were headlines. Urban Whitaker accused of embezzlement. Sources cite millions missing. Whitaker Construction rocked by allegations of fraud. Rising star or falling scoundrel. Urban Whitaker's reputation in question. I watched the news with a glass of bourbon in hand, the firelight flickering against the walls of my study. Every word was a symphony. Every headline a note in the requiem of the Whitakers' arrogance. The journalist hadn't held back fraud, mismanagement, even hints of infidelity. It was all there, printed in black and white for the world to consume. At a press conference the next day, Eldon Whitaker, usually so composed, stood behind the podium pale and trembling. "We are aware of the allegations," he stammered, "and will cooperate fully with any investigation." His voice cracked on the word investigation. That was the moment I knew. The Whitaker fortress was crumbling. That evening, Megan came to me. Her face was ashen, her hands trembling as she clutched the printed article. "Dad," she whispered, "is it true? Did Urban really?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I guided her to the sofa, poured her a glass of water, and let her breathe. "Megan," I said softly, "you know I would never lie to you. You've seen the charges, the evidence. You've felt the late nights, the excuses. Deep down, you already knew. Her lips quivered. I defended him, Dad. I defended him against you. And all this time, you were right. Tears welled in her eyes. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing, the weight of betrayal crashing over her. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her as I had, when she was a child, afraid of thunderstorms. You are not to blame, I murmured. The Whitakers are masters of illusion. But illusions always shatter. For the first time in years, she clung to Minot as a distant father she pitied, but as the only steady truth she had left. The Whitakers had built their empire on reputation. Reputation in business, in society, in the eyes of neighbors and peers. Without it, they were nothing. And now, their reputation was ashes. At the next high society gala, people whispered openly. No one clamored to greet Eldon. No one flattered Urban. Their table, once the centerpiece of attention, sat half empty as guests excused themselves with polite lies. I watched from across the room, Megan beside me, her arm looped through mine. When Urban tried to approach her, she turned her head sharply, refusing even eye contact. The humiliation was exquisite. For years, they had painted me as less than, as unworthy. Now, before the entire community, they were the pariahs. It wasn't enough to watch from a distance. I needed to look Urban in the eye, to let him feel the consequences of his arrogance. The opportunity came 2 days later when he showed up at my home unannounced. His suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, his voice hoarse. You did this, he spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. You ruined me. I leaned back in my chair, studying him like one might study a bug crawling across the floor. No, Urban, you ruined yourself. I just let the truth out. His face twisted. Do you think Megan will forgive you for this? You think she'll run back into your arms? She's mine. I stood slowly, closing the distance between us until we were face to face. Megan was never yours. You lied to her, cheated on her, used her as a prop to prop up your family name, but now she sees you for what you are. I lowered my voice to a whisper, my words razor sharp. You should have left me alone, Urban. You should have never humiliated me at that wedding, because now, you have nothing. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. Real fear. Days later, Megan filed for separation. I accompanied her to the lawyer's office, sitting silently as she signed the papers with shaking hands. This isn't how I imagined my marriage ending, she murmured, her voice brittle. No one imagines betrayal, I replied gently. But you're free now, and freedom is worth more than any name, any fortune. When she looked at me, her eyes were no longer clouded by doubt or shame. They were clear, determined. Thank you, Dad, she whispered. For everything. And in that moment, I knew my revenge had already succeeded, not just against Urban, but against the entire Whitaker clan, because I had reclaimed what mattered most, my daughter's trust. The final blow came when the authorities launched a formal investigation into Whitaker construction. Banks froze accounts. Investors fled. Projects stalled. Urban, once paraded as the firm's golden heir, was suspended indefinitely. Eldon's health faltered under the stress. At board meetings, their name was spoken with pity, not respect. I didn't need to raise a hand. They destroyed themselves with their own corruption. I had merely lit the fuse. As I sat in my study one evening, Megan visiting for dinner, laughter filling the house again for the first time in years, I realized something profound. Revenge wasn't about shouting at the world, you hurt me, now I'll hurt you back. True revenge was quieter, smarter. It was making your enemies dig their own graves while you built a life worth living. And the Whitakers, they were already 6 feet under. The Whitakers were finished. Not by my hand, not directly, but by the weight of their own greed, arrogance, and corruption. Their empire, once so mighty, now looked like a crumbling sandcastle washed away by the tide. But I wasn't celebrating in the streets. I wasn't laughing in their faces or dancing on their graves. Instead, I sat quietly in my home, the place they once mocked, the place they said I didn't belong, and I felt something unexpected. Peace. Megan started visiting more often. At first, it was small things. Dinners after work, a phone call here and there. Then, slowly, it became habit. Every Sunday, she came by, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to sit and talk. One evening, she brought an old photo album. We sat together at the kitchen table, flipping through the pages. Pictures of her childhood, birthdays, vacations, silly moments where frosting covered her face or her hair was sticking up in every direction. I forgot how happy we were back then, she said softly, tracing her finger along a picture of her 6th birthday. Before I met Urban, before the Whitakers, I placed my hand over hers. We can have that again, Megan. Maybe not the same, but happiness doesn't disappear. It just waits for you to claim it again. She leaned against me, and for the first time in years, I felt like her father again. Not the outcast. Not the forgotten man, her father. Urban tried, of course, to salvage his reputation. He issued public statements, hired lawyers, tried to charm Megan back, But the mask had slipped. The lies no longer worked. She ignored his calls, blocked his number, and when he tried showing up at her workplace, security escorted him out. The man who once strutted through life with his chest puffed out like a peacock was now a shadow, a whisper. His arrogance was gone, replaced with bitterness. I ran into him one last time, outside the courthouse. He looked at me with bloodshot eyes, his once perfect suit now wrinkled and ill-fitting. "You'll pay for this," he hissed. I smiled faintly. "No, Urban, you already did." I walked away, leaving him to choke on his own downfall. That was the last I ever saw of him. Weeks later, Megan suggested something I never expected. "Dad," she said, "I want you to come with me to the next community dinner, the one the Whitakers always used to host." I hesitated. Why would I want to step foot in that viper's nest again? She smiled. "Because this time, it won't be their nest, it'll be yours." And so I agreed. That night, we walked in together. The air was thick with whispers, not about me, but about the Whitakers' collapse, about how Urban had ruined himself, about how Eldon had vanished from public view. But when they saw me, people smiled. They greeted me warmly, with respect I hadn't felt in years. Not because I'd destroyed the Whitakers, but because I had endured them, and come out stronger. At the buffet table, someone sliced a cake. They handed me the first piece. For a moment, my throat tightened. I remembered Megan's wedding, the shame of being denied even a slice while the Whitakers laughed. But this time, it was different. Megan stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. I took the slice. Slowly, deliberately, and with the first bite, I knew the circle was complete. Revenge, I realized, was never truly about them. It was about me, about reclaiming my dignity, my place in the world, my bond with my daughter. The Whitakers thought they had erased me, that they could take my family, my pride, my worth. But here I was, whole again, respected, loved. Urban was dust, Eldon was a ghost. Their name, once so powerful, was now a warning, a tale whispered of pride before the fall. In me, I was no longer the forgotten father. I was Theodore Kane, a man who stood tall, who didn't need their table, their approval, or their cake. I had carved out my own justice. Later that night, Megan hugged me tightly before leaving. "Dad," she said softly, "I don't care what the world thinks. You're the only family I need." I kissed her forehead, my eyes stinging. "And you'll always be mine." As I watched her drive away, headlights vanishing into the night, I felt a deep, satisfying calm. The Whitakers were gone. Their empire, their arrogance, their lies, all crumbled. But my daughter's love, that remained, stronger than ever. And in the end, that was the sweetest revenge of all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a good revenge tale. And don't forget, more powerful stories are coming soon.